So joined Stash with a lot of excitement for the space. Going back to why I even got into video games in the first place, and mobile games specifically, the direct-to-consumer capabilities, the distribution possibilities. It's amazing to be at the forefront of this revolution that I think the industry is undergoing, and to be able to really spearhead what I think is the infrastructure, building out the infrastructure that the industry is going to rely on for many years to come. So I view Stash as an amazing growth opportunity and something that can align interests of developers, publishers, consumers in a way that most companies can only dream of doing. So it's really exciting to be here, and looking forward to building something great.
Yo, welcome to Secret Stash. I'm your host, Archie Stonehill. I am not joined by my co-host today, Justin Kahn, who couldn't make it. But today we have two very special guests with us. They're special not just because of their careers and their stories, but also because they've recently joined us here at Stash. So I'll let them mostly introduce ourselves. They share a working history, and say welcome to our new CEO, Henry, and our new CPO, Spencer. Say hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey, nice to be here.
All right. Well, we're going to get into their histories, their kind of stories, how they ended up at Stash, and what they see for the future. They both have amazing backgrounds in games and direct-to-consumer specifically. They both work together at Scopely, as we'll hear, but then individually have worked at a whole bunch of other who's who of top-tier game developers. So with that, I'll let them really introduce themselves. Why don't we start with Henry, our new CEO? So Henry, welcome.
Yeah, great to be here with you guys. Really excited to be here at Stash and working with you two gentlemen. I started my career a long time ago in the entertainment industry, specifically in the film industry as a film producer. Moved out to LA right after college, was able to produce a few movies, and got really excited by one of my biggest passions in entertainment, video games, especially as the App Store opened up, distributing games to hundreds of millions of people directly in their pocket. I mean, it was kind of amazing to me that people were walking around with the best distribution capabilities that we'd ever seen in the history of entertainment. And app developers had the ability to effectively, in some ways at the time, in my mind, go direct to consumer. The free-to-play business model was the next unlock for me. I was mesmerized by the idea of actually giving something away for free, but being able to generate more revenue. As a traditionalist in the entertainment industry, that was something that was just really counterintuitive and an extremely interesting business proposition. And I was lucky enough to hook up with this tiny company that no one had ever heard of, about 20 people in a loft in Hollywood. It was Scopely. And I joined as the first business development executive, joining the executive team and sticking with the company for about 8 years as the company scaled to well over 1,000 people. It was a really exciting time in my career. I had a front row seat on what was happening in mobile free to play. Best education I could have ever received about growth and operating a business from 0 to 100, and got to meet people all over the world in the game industry, which was amazing. I got to travel the world, meeting game developers, building out Scopely Studio ecosystem, eventually forming the Corp Dev group and acquiring a handful of studios while I was there. I also was really involved with product strategy and the licensing business, and that led me to my next job, where I was at One Team Partners as the chief product officer, leading the way to basically put out sports games across different mediums, from Web3 to mobile to console, and eventually came over to Homa after One Team went through a nice exit, joining Homa as the president and chief business officer. Was there as we made our push from hyper into hybrid casual, notably launching All in Whole, which is a top 50 grossing game in the US, and something that I think really paves the way for an amazing future for Homa as they launch games that can really scale and sustain over time. So joined Stash with a lot of excitement for the space. Going back to why I even got into video games in the first place, and mobile games specifically, the direct-to-consumer capabilities, the distribution possibilities. It's amazing to be at the forefront of this revolution that I think the industry is undergoing, and to be able to really spearhead what I think is the infrastructure, building out the infrastructure that the industry is going to rely on for many years to come. So I view Stash as an amazing growth opportunity and something that can align interests of developers, publishers, consumers in a way that most companies can only dream of doing. So it's really exciting to be here, and looking forward to building something great.
That's awesome. Yeah, I will say that when we were thinking about looking for a new CEO, I remember me talking with Robin, one of our co-founders, and we were both like, yeah, like we got to find someone like Henry Lowenfels. Like that's who we've got to find. And then sure enough, Robin hit me up being like, Henry's kind of maybe open to it. And I was like, no way. So you were like the paradigm of the kind of CEO character we were going to look for. And there's a remarkable, I would say, if not causation track, correlation between you being at institutions and then having, as you put it, very nice exits. So, we hope Stash is the next rocket ship that you're at least in the vicinity of. All right. Well, I want to dig a bit more into that history as well, but why don't we switch over to Spencer? And Spencer, could you tell us a bit about your background also in games? And
Sure. Yeah. So similar to Henry, started in a different industry completely. I was in banking for like 8-ish years at Wells Fargo doing bank ops.
Can I ask when that was?
Yeah, oh my gosh. I can't. It was so long ago.
During the '08 crash?
It was, yeah. So it was during the, I was part of the Wells Wachovia merger. I was at Wells Fargo when they acquired Wachovia and kind of integrated them, which was a lot of stories there as well. I'm sure some other time we can talk about them. But one of the things I kind of learned over the course of my time at Wells Fargo was, that's an industry that's so mature that it takes forever to change, sort of innovate, et cetera. It is a 150-year-old business. I've been a gamer since I was little, like Commodore 64, all the way up, like Atari 2600, all the way up to like current consoles, building arcade caps in my spare time, that kind of stuff. Huge into games. So it was always kind of like a dream to work in gaming, but I had a career, and obviously, back then to get into gaming, you had to start from the bottom and kind of work your way up regardless of what your career used to be, right? So it would be like get into QA and then move your way up. However, during that kind of mortgage crisis, I was like, I really want to change industries. So I just decided to look for, I forget the name of the website. There was a website that used to post like game related jobs. And I was just like, I'll just check out the website, see what's there. And this company called Area Games showed up, and they were looking for a producer, but the definition, like the role description for the job, was much more similar to what I'd been historically doing, and the business model sounded really unique. So it was free to play, PC MMO browser games, and this was when people really hadn't really heard of free to play at all. So they would bring titles over from Asia, South Korea, like China, some out of Europe, et cetera. And then they publish them in the US and make changes and operate them as a publisher. So I said, drove out there. I said, like, let me check it out. Let me see what this is all about. Had a conversation with them, and I was like, oh, this is super interesting. Free to play is definitely the future, because it's like a distribution advantage, but you've got, the ability to let a person personalize their game experience and ultimately engage to whatever degree that they're comfortable with, which is fundamentally different than the traditional kind of gaming industry model where box product and all that stuff. So it's pretty interesting, interesting opportunity. So I decided to take that job. Big risk, but I took the job, and turned out to be the right decision, right? Because free to play took off like crazy. But that was my first experience actually with direct to consumer. The entirety of the revenue stream for all those products that were being published primarily came from web, from like direct to consumer web sort of stores, and the clients were like very small amounts of the total revenue.
Was it on like dedicated websites, or was it on Facebook?
Yeah, so we built a centralized kind of like portal for all those games. We actually unified a currency, like a global currency called area points, across like all the games as well. But it was one website, and we basically duplicate tools across every single game that we would launch, and then we'd bring them up and kind of, the player population use those websites, not just to make purchases, but also for engagement stuff like global chat. We had a whole bunch of like a suite of merchandising tools, actually some of which we looked at game data to see what features were most, sort of sticky and produced the best kind of like engagement result. And we actually ripped out some of those features in terms of the design and built modular kind of agnostic versions of those. So like enchantment system, loot wheels, loot forges, mystery boxes, choice boxes, tiered spenders, like all kinds of crazy stuff. And it was like 95% of the revenue that we were driving. So that was a pretty cool experience. Really crash course. I mean, it was crazy. Very kind of like bleeding edge industry that was very young. So you have to do pretty much everything that you've never done before by yourself and teach yourself how to do all that stuff. But during my process of working there, smartphones started like taking off, and I was like, oh, this is going to be like huge for distribution, right? So similar to free to play, kind of opening the floodgates on, you know, deeper monetization and like a much lower barrier of entry for playing a game. I saw mobile as like, you know, Moore's law. It's going to ultimately become the dominant sort of platform of play in the future. So I wanted to get in early on that. So there were, you know, a bunch of us were going to different companies. Some of us went to Kabam. Some of us went to like various other places. I looked at Glue and I was like, hey, Glue has high fidelity product, but they're weak in the area that I'm strong, which is games as a service and like analytics and kind of monetization strategy and that sort of stuff. So I ended up moving over there, taking a role there. Originally came in to build the product team out pretty much from scratch. And then we had huge success with like Deer Hunter 2014, Kim Kardashian, a bunch of other things that kind of like really accelerated Glue as a company and kind of put them on the map. Eventually they got bought by EA, but that was a pretty awesome experience. And then I looked at, you know, what's the next kind of play. Again, I'm always looking for kind of like what's bleeding edge. And I was like, I think the next play is going to be kind of what I was doing before at Area, but to the benefit of mobile. So margin control via direct to consumer, more robust kind of duplicatable web sort of tools and kind of stickier engagement systems than you would naturally get in a mobile game, because at the time mobile games were a little limited. And so I went over to Gree, which was interested in going after this cross-platform play. And I was there for quite a while we were going through, hey, do we do cross-platform? Like, what's it look like, et cetera? But they had the Funzio portfolio and a bunch of like Japanese IP, and they were building some cool stuff out in Melbourne. And I was there for about a year and a half, and then Scopely had been hitting me up for a while, and I saw that as like a company that definitely was going to be taking off, and Henry was there at the time, and so I decided to, you know, take the plunge and go to Scopely, and basically was there, you know, for 5 years and launched their direct to consumer platform from scratch, which I'm sure we can touch on, but that was, you know, an awesome experience, and really seeing that company scale from being small to like ultimately this monster that it is now was pretty awesome. And then from there, I looked at, you know, what's another new bleeding edge thing that I might be interested in getting into. And for better or worse, it was like NFT Web3 gaming. And I think, you know, maybe it's still not mature enough to really dominate the space, but it was a really interesting experience. So I became a CGO at Yuga Labs, like the Bored Ape Yacht Club, those guys. And then worked on a bunch of games, launched Dookie Dash, had some pretty cool experiences there. Moved over to a kind of a platform tech company called Faraway that also launches games, like publishes games. And I was there until, you know, just recently, and then decided to join Stash and get the team back together. So
nice. Well, we're very happy to have both of you. Just so I can understand, like, Henry, when you entered Scopely, like, where was it as a company? You said 20 people. Any games out? Anything?
Yeah, it was very early. We actually announced our seed round on, I think, the first Thursday or Tuesday that I was in the building, which was really exciting. They had technically raised the round, but, you know, it was basically a seed stage company. We had one little game called Dice with Buddies, and we had just launched a game called Jewels with Buddies, which people probably don't remember, but was actually a PvP match game, maybe a precursor to what Candyvore is doing, I suppose. We were about to launch our third third game, Bubble Galaxy with buddies, which was a PvP turn-based bubble shooter. And, we launched those games. And what was really interesting about that moment in time was we kept thinking that we needed new games to replace the inevitable revenue loss that would happen to DICE. We were looking at this game and saying, okay, yeah, it's doing $1 million a month, maybe, but it's never going to sustain. It's going to go away. So we need to launch new games. And, we would launch Bubble Galaxy and it would spike, and we would launch Jewels and it would spike, and then those games would kind of decline. They weren't really built for the long haul, and there was a lot of learnings about free-to-play and games as a service, and DICE was this little engine that kept ticking along. And lo and behold, here we are. DICE turned into Yahtzee with buddies and the DICE family, and it's a $100 million plus a year business that is still sustaining extremely well. I think it just goes to show the power of free-to-play and the way that people consume content now. So it was a very small business. A lot of my job was really trying to understand what the market needed from a mobile free-to-play publisher. Wasn't an obvious thing back then that would be a sustainable model.
Can I also ask, because the DICE game, was that developed by Mediatonic or?
No. Mediatonic is a fantastic developer, Fall Guys, and eventually acquired by Epic. Mediatonic came on way later. So it was actually developed by one individual, a guy named Justin Stoffel, who Scopely brought in as our director of engineering. We acquired the game, and Justin came on board and was there for many years and was a big part of Scopely's early growth. And we built that game out from what it was. Actually, when we acquired the game had no in-app purchases in it. There was no such thing as a bonus roll. It was purely ad-based, but it was extremely retentive. So credit to the early Scopely thinking that, okay, there's something here when you see the amount of engagement you're getting. Even though the revenue isn't big, this is so sticky. And so from there, we were able to start to monetize it with in-app purchases and eventually drive a lot of revenue through IAPs. But no, DICE eventually turned into Yahtzee. It was actually the same game. We just branded it and got the Yahtzee license. Really unlocked a whole new audience that we didn't think was even there.
Were you involved in that deal?
Yeah, that was very early in our foray into licensing. I credit Tim O'Brien with coming in and really identifying the fact that we probably should go after Yahtzee. In fact, Hasbro was looking at Scopely as not their favorite game publisher at the time because we were effectively ripping off Yahtzee. Dice with Buddies was Yahtzee. And they had sent cease and desist letters. They were not really too pleased that Scopely was ripping their game off, but you can't trademark a game mechanic. And so Scopely was well in their legal right to do what they were doing. And we finally went to them and said, hey, why don't we try licensing this game? I remember we thought that Yahtzee with Buddies would maybe do a couple $1 million annually and maybe, be incremental revenue on top with Dice, because we'd been acquiring users for many years at that point and figured, most people who want this game have already seen it. And when we put it out, it really showed the power of the IP, not just from a marketability standpoint, but from an engagement standpoint. Yep. We saw KPIs on the retention and the monetization side that were 2x what we saw in Dice with Buddies. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it. When you go into CVS or Walgreens and there's Tylenol on the shelf, and then there's the Walgreens brand, and it's half the price. Most people are going to buy the Tylenol for twice the price. It's the trusted brand. And that was a really interesting moment for Scopely and showed us the power of what we were getting into and what we had access to, being based in LA with a lot of Hollywood and entertainment ties, and that kind of led us in headlong into the IP business.
Yeah, I think, we've spoken about IP previously on this podcast. I think last with Owen Mahoney, we really dug into it because I do think there's certain IP fits whereby it's not just a UA mechanic, it enhances the gameplay. And I think that for a long time we saw this with like football games where, FIFA's license versus, Pro Evo, for example, like it wasn't just that, it was a brand acquisition play. It's also that like the fantasy of the gameplay when you're actually playing with the team you know and love and the players you love is a better fantasy. It's a better gameplay experience. And I think Monopoly Go is like the most recent example of this working incredibly well, where like the game mechanic is very, very similar to some of the mechanics that Israeli game developers like Jelly Button were developing years ago. And I actually have spoken to the Jelly Button team. I know them pretty well. And, they're a little bit like, we wanted to work with Monopoly back then. But I think that from what I've heard, Scopely already had that Monopoly license for a long time before.
Yeah.
Is that the same Hasbro deal?
We acquired the Scopely license, we acquired the Monopoly license must have been 2016,
Yeah.
something around thereabouts, and paid a lot over the years for a license that we were not monetizing, but saw such incredible results when we would test the marketability that we knew if we cracked it, we could get it right. So that was a journey. I was a part of that journey and left as we were really spinning up the current iteration of what Monopoly became, but spent a lot of time, a lot of money, and credit to Scopely for staying the course on something they really believed in.
So how did the company move from casual dice games to more mid-core strategy games? Was that the next step in the company's progression?
Yeah, a lot of people looked at it as a pivot at the time. And I vividly remember going to GDC or talking to game developers and mentioning that we were going to go into mid-core, and there was a lot of skepticism. We were the company that just made, at the time, asynchronous turn-based games, these little casual dice games. The way we did it was really through partnerships and people. And it was a great lesson in my career that if you can get the right people in the building and bring them together and find the right folks for them to be working with, you can definitely build on top of what you're doing, right? So, I mean, it's a big part of why when I look around at Stash and I see people like Spencer, when I see people like you, Archie, it's really exciting because I know that we have that level of talent density. But when we went in to go build our first mid-core game, which was The Walking Dead, we brought in a guy from Gree who had ran a big game that was a top 25 grossing game, Knights and Dragons. We actually went out and got the same game developer that built Knights and Dragons. So Jory and Ayugo really spearheaded that for us and brought a lot of experience to the table. And then, we were able to build on top of the infrastructure we had. So processes evolved, but the people and the partners were really what drove that. And I think that it's something that is not easy to do, but if you have the ability to really empower people and place a lot of trust in them and give them the time and the access to go after something big, it can be done.
But that you said that you went to GDC saying you had that strategy to go into mid-core. So that was a deliberate choice.
Absolutely. Well, we wanted to be a multi-genre publishing powerhouse. Okay. So for us, it wasn't about making one kind of game. In fact, we felt that the way that we were set up was really scalable to be able to make many kinds of games, so long as we partnered with the right studios and brought in the right publishing people and the right product people to really focus on these genres.
Okay, cool. So then I want to get the company's timeline until Spencer joined. What happened next after you had success with The Walking Dead?
Yeah, so we actually went out and started acquiring a lot of different licenses, from Star Trek to WWE to Monopoly even, and we built out what was a slate that we felt high conviction around, and then we started to go look for partners that could go execute against our plans. We also spent a lot of time with product strategy thinking about what was the conceit of this IP, right? Star Trek was a really interesting one. A lot of people at the time were trying to make Clash of Clans clones. We wanted to get into strategy. We wanted to build out the mid-core portfolio. And we actually were thinking for a time, okay, let's go try to find an IP that we can build what we call a mobile RTS, a game like Clash of Clans. And ultimately, we identified Star Trek as a really interesting and potentially underserved IP. As product strategy went deep on that, we said, this is actually not an IP about blowing things up in outer space like a lot of people think about it. It's an IP about diplomacy. It's an IP about politics. And we saw this game that was really starting to scale called Game of War that a lot of people thought was, sort of a menu-based, boring, low-quality game, but was monetizing like crazy, educating a lot of people on what a mobile 4X could be, inspired by Chinese MMOs. And we said, okay, this is something that actually marries really well to the Star Trek IP. We ended up going through that exercise many times over. Ultimately, what led to the success of Monopoly today, I think, was a similar type of thinking. But we were really building out, I'd say, a portfolio of IPs, building out a roster of developers, and on a relentless pursuit for talent, which led us to Spencer. And I think, one thing I want to credit is the Scopely recruiting machine and the Scopely leadership having an eye for that talent and not just pursuing people and then giving up, but I think Spencer referenced it earlier, contacting him for years, knowing, one of the things that Walter did really, really well in the early days, he would go around and he would say, who are the smartest people that we should be talking to? And he would ask this to everybody. And so he would amass this roster of individuals that we were constantly talking to. I would be going to different cities to visit a game developer, and I would go have lunch with a product manager who was building an interesting game, or even a junior producer who was working on something that we could learn from. And so we built a learning machine, and we're trying to just amass as much talent as we possibly could. And that's really what led to bringing in folks like Spencer to build out that exec team to be the best in the business.
It must have broken down recently because I haven't gotten my call yet. So it can't be what it once was.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised you haven't. You should check your inbox or your LinkedIn DMs.
Spam
I'm sure
folder.
it's there. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you get to this point where you are an incredibly successful game developer with a roster of very successful games. At that time, what were the top games? It was
What was it? Walking Dead, Yahtzee. Strikeforce was not a part of it yet.
Okay.
The Fox Next acquisition hadn't happened. I'm trying to remember every game. There's so many games.
Yeah, we had Looney Tunes. We had so really it was Walking Dead was the big dog.
Yeah.
Yahtzee scaled really well too. It was those two games were our two biggest games. We launched WWE. That was a pretty solid success as well. Then we launched Looney Tunes and Star Trek within about 1 month of each other. Looney Tunes did nicely. Star Trek came out like gangbusters. Again, going back to the retention profile, this game had a retention curve that was best in class for a mobile 4X game. And not only that, it monetized really, really well. So that was a really great moment for us. And that was probably the next level of monetization. Star Trek was our biggest game for a time until we did, acquire Marvel Strike Force. I think that was late 2019, shortly before I left, that we brought that game in-house. And that was a really big one for us as well.
all right. So then Spencer enters the picture. You come in, and what is your job?
So my job was interesting. So I had probably, definitely for me, the longest title I've ever had over the course of my entire career, which covers kind of what I was doing. It was SVP of Product Monetization and Analytics. So long title, but really, the analytics function kind of rolled into me. I was looking at monetization strategy, and then some of the product teams, including WWE, rolled into me. And what I was doing was, improving sort of our product thinking broadly, or looking at ways to innovate on the product thinking side of things, and finding ways to kind of really supercharge these products, some of which were pretty old, but wanting to see growth, not decay on those products, and then thinking about innovative ways to approach sort of UA and marketing in terms of P&L management and kind of looking at the data to make smarter decisions. And I'm happy to drill into any of these things, but there are a lot of insights that you kind of glean if you know the right questions to ask and the data to kind of support it. And then eventually I started using WWE as a test bed for all kinds of stuff. Retention features, LTV features.
Why that game in particular?
One, because I had the most kind of control, and the team was very galvanized around me and the vision for the product. So it became very easy to manage change, I guess you could say, on that product in particular. Because I was in effect also functioning kind of like the GM for that product until we staffed a GM for it. So it was a test bed, and I believe so. One of the things I think I learned this at Glue, it is really, really difficult to get a company, especially one of some degree of scale, to change and to go after, a big opportunity across the entire company if there's any kind of resistance internally to it, or if there's a question around whether or not that's the right direction to be moving in. So I always find it to be much more effective to find, let's call it the key product and the key evangelist team and the correct DRIs for each of those sort of initiatives, and then focus your energy there. Use that as a kind of litmus test or a validation point. And then from that position of strength, you can get the leverage required to move the company in that direction if the opportunity is big enough. So did that a number of different times. I did it with, cutting marketing out of the kind of budget of the P&L, which at the time was a not popular decision. Kind of same thing with UA, deciding, maybe cutting that back was the right move, even if DAO is decaying, because the reality is, there's a lot of, the sticky population is going to continue to stick around. And instead of focusing on the front of the funnel and trying to replace the people that are attriting, it might be more effective to retain those people and keep that behavior going as long as possible, because they're the customers you've already won. Plus they'll be, potentially valuable in other places in the portfolio over time if they adopt some more of your products. So stuff like that. And then eventually, obviously, direct to consumer was a big one, probably the biggest one.
Did you come into Scopely with this idea that like it was time for direct to consumer?
Absolutely, 100%. Yes, I like going back to my first gaming job, right? Like that literally was 95% of the revenue of that company, which eventually was acquired by Gamigo. But seeing that and then moving into mobile and looking at like a number of things, like one, how engaged people are with the product and because of the form factor and it's mobile, et cetera, and knowing that the tolerance for friction was much higher than people thought it was. And I can get into that, but like I knew the opportunity was massive there. And I knew that there was a clear playbook because I'd done it for years.
What do you think led to, so this is like 2019?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think led at that time for multiple companies, like quite independently
to go after it?
Yeah, you had Playtika, obviously Epic, came out with their 2020 actions. Like, what do you think was happening in the industry?
Yeah, so I think it's a culmination of a few different things. First, and probably the most obvious, right, is if you own a P&L and you're looking at the P&L and you've optimized as much as you possibly can, your P&L, what's the biggest point of leverage that you haven't optimized yet that scales with revenue?
Yeah.
It's a cost that scales. It's not a fixed cost, not like OpEx.
So this is the 30%
Exactly. Yeah. And so if you want to improve the position of your P&L, that's a clear place to focus, right? So I think a lot of people made that determination pretty early on. I think there's a lot of hesitation. We can get into why. And I think some people's risk tolerance was greater than others. I also think that at the same time I was doing D2C, way back, pre-mobile, a lot of other people were also doing D2C. So you've got Outspark, Kabam, Zynga to some degree.
Yeah.
So like there's a lot of players, and I think like people like me ended up in those companies and probably had a similar kind of like knowledge that this is absolutely doable and like the future is possible here. And then I think if you combine that with pressures around like the UA sort of scalability of a product and like introduction of things like IDFA, GDPR, ATT, that kind of stuff, you've got even more pressure on that P&L and more tolerance for risk. And I think that's ultimately what led to a number of people, getting ahead of the curve, so to speak, and going after it. And I think Epic was in a really good position to take a very like aggressive approach, just given where the revenue was coming from. You've got Roblox. I mean, there's a number of players out there that had, let's call it, the legal stomach for going, very aggressively against that. And you had a lot of people that were less sort of aggressive. And we fell in that like weird category of like, I've got high conviction and enough say and the right team to kind of go after it. And oddly enough, people probably don't know this, but we launched the WWE direct to consumer stuff before the Apple Epic kind of stuff came out. It was like right before, but
you got to remember that from about 2008 to 2018, every year there were more and more people, getting new devices, installing apps for the very first time. Every year around Christmas time, people would go and they would say, what apps do I want on my phone? They would look to the app stores. Organics were huge. If you could get featured in 2012, 2013, I mean, 500,000, a million installs right there, right? As soon as the market started to become more mature, you had to look for other ways to expand your margins because the tides weren't just rising. It wasn't just going to happen for you. Organics were getting harder to come by. Nobody needed a new mobile game. So how do you more artfully monetize the people who are already engaged? How do you find ways to grow that business when the business isn't naturally going to be growing? And I think that was that moment in time. And, COVID sort of had a layer over it where it made it seem like it was still growing because everyone was at home playing games. But if you just look at that moment, that was really the first moment that the industry became what I consider to be mature. Today, we're even in a far more mature place. It's that much harder to launch a game. UA is that much harder. We thought it was hard in 2015 to acquire users compared to 2010. Well, look at 2025 compared to 2020. Right. So you're not just trying to find new users and replacing revenue with people churning out. You're actually trying to keep people in the game, figure out ways to give them the best experience possible, and figuring out the ways to expand your margins and create a win-win between both the consumer and the publisher. And that's what D2C actually does.
Yeah. Totally. I think that organics point is super important. And I think more broadly, like, especially once ATT happened, there was a general sense that, like, these guys aren't giving us anything, we shouldn't give them anything. And it kind of turned from the attitude of, like, app stores are partners who enable us to grow to, like, app stores are kind of parasitic vampires leeching off our success. Maybe not that extreme, but nevertheless, when you first started raising this idea of D2C at Scopely, like, was there a fear of pissing off the app stores?
Absolutely. Yeah. I would say, like, and justifiably, you know, to be fair.
Well, Scopely had long benefited from great relationships with the app stores.
Yeah.
You know, we had been featured right, left, and center for all of our games. It had driven tremendous amounts of installs for us. Discoverability was very, very important in the app store. And so, yeah, we didn't want to bite the hand that was feeding us.
Yep.
And we had great relationships at that time.
Yep. And I mean, there are best practices to kind of, like, mitigate some of the surface area of risk there. But, you know, ultimately, I think, like, yes, there was a hesitation. I think, you know, there were a number of concerns that were raised. And to be honest, I suspect a lot of these concerns are still raised to this day. Because I still think we're at the very beginning of this D2C sort of journey. And I think, like, you know, the concerns around what's this going to do from a friction standpoint, is it going to cannibalize revenue in some other places, you know, if in the event that you're passing some sort of discount or have exclusive stuff, like, what happens to your economy? Of course, App Store, sort of Apple, Google, risk surface space and concerns there. There was just a lot of, there's always going to be a lot of reasons to say no to something. I think, you know, it is a measured and thoughtful approach to how you go after that thing in a way that mitigates the risk that ultimately is the goal, one, and then two, puts you in a position to be able to kind of give something a try. But if you're not trying it, you're going to fall behind, because this industry is, to Henry's point, a power law sort of distribution, you know, users and revenue. And if you're going to maintain your position, you have to be either the best optimizer in a really red ocean, or you have to find some new paradigm to kind of play in, and be really early at that paradigm so that you can capture that power law distribution kind of advantage downstream. So I think, like, yeah, there's a lot of resistance, but I think some people understood the opportunity, and it's just, again, like, this is why I believe finding the right team that's bought in and has skin in the game and is ultimately dedicated not to check a box, but to do it well, you know, and lead in a category.
And one of the things that Scopely was really great at and is really great at is user experience. You know, Spencer was really innovating in that way, right? It wasn't just, hey, here's a better deal or a better offer. It was actually, here's a reason to go and engage with the web shop. Here's a reason, if you're a power user, why you might want to go check this out. And so it actually enhanced the user experience. It became a win-win. And that's the thing. When you structure it properly, it actually works for everyone. You know, the app stores might not like it as much, but, you know, they're still making their money. There's still people who are buying through the app stores no matter what. So for your power users, for your people who are your most engaged users, if you can provide them with a more customized, more personalized experience and reasons why it makes the game better for them, which is really what the success of the WWE web shop was, and some of the early web shops were, was enhancing the game, not just giving a discount and creating a little bit of friction, but making this a better thing to consume.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's another thing that's, like, really important to know and keep in mind is, like, yes, it's all about the experience and the benefit to the player at the end of the day. And this might be surprising, but when we launched the WWE direct to consumer stuff, there was no discounts at all. It was exactly the same price. If anything, there was just more friction. So you ask yourself, why are people, like, going through that extra friction to engage with that system? And the answer is because we built a robust kind of system of engagement that was beneficial to the player, and it was attractive, and so they engaged with it. And I think, you know, that's one thing you have to keep in mind with direct to consumer. It's, you know, ultimately it's not about just saving that margin. It's about, again, increasing the total pie of engagement and revenue, and creating, like, habituation cycles that keep your game alive and durable for way longer. It's about retaining that most like core, highest engaged kind of player base in your game.
Completely. Yeah. I think the least successful web shops we've seen or D2C efforts are all those that are purely transactional, where it's purely an exchange of value. I mean, that does sometimes work. It depends on the game. But I can highlight some features I've admired from Scopely stores, which certainly have been like models of D2C in the industry, for, as you say, like leveraging D2C channels to add value in the ways that are only possible in those channels. Like I think things that are suited for web-based interfaces, for example, rather than native app opportunities are a great area of innovation. One of the features I particularly like in some of Scopely's games is they have these like alliance finders in Marvel Strike Force, at least, which touches on a theme I'm constantly going on about at Stash, which is social discovery, that I think games are very good at social activity. So if you have people to play with, games are quite good at facilitating you to do that with chat functions and friend functions, etc. But what they're quite bad at is enabling you to discover and meet new people to play with. A lot of that happens in forums or discords, etc. But I thought it was a really good example of like using the web-based environment, using the web store to facilitate social discovery and players connecting with each other. So certainly something that resonates here. So that is really interesting, by the way, that when you launched WWE's D2C offering, you didn't even have economic incentives.
That was an intentional decision.
Okay.
Yeah. It was my belief that you didn't need that to kind of produce the result I thought was possible.
Yeah.
Because obviously I wasn't discounting, back at the other company, and 95% of the revenue was coming from D2C.
So what were some of the kind of engagement systems you used to bring in? Yeah,
there were guilds, events. I mean, here's another kind of cool thing to note. It is difficult to build a feature on mobile because you basically have to do a new build every single time.
Yeah.
Code can get like messy over time, et cetera. You don't know how. There's a lot of risk involved with adding a feature. So, like for example, if I was going to add a guild feature to a game that did not have a guild feature, the time it would take to build a good competitive guild feature and integrate that into a build could be months, could be a year. Like who knows what the impact would be, from a opportunity cost standpoint for that team. However, if I was to build a guild feature first on web, I don't have to worry about all the stuff breaking on the place that all the players are spending most of their time. I could be a little more, speed to market kind of oriented and iterate on whatever that feature is, and then use it as a litmus test. And if it works really well, then you adopt it to the game, right? So it's D2C to me is like, it's optimizing for workflows, devs, like resource allocation. It's also about like meeting the customer where they are at all times, which is a big part of it. But I think in general, you don't need necessarily even discounts to motivate a person to adopt direct to consumer. I think it is a value proposition. And yes, discounts are a form of value, but there are so many other things. So like guilds, leaderboards, trivia. We made a little mini trivia game. I actually had a funny story with that. It's still there. There's like a WWE trivia. So we did a poll on the game, like in the game, and asked people like, hey, what are the types of games that you would like to kind of play? And the goal was to find something that fell into a more casual category. And the reason for that is like WWE is a match 3 RPG game, which might sound casual, but it's very not.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to do, again, I'm looking for any advantage I can get, right? Is how maybe there's an opportunity here where if the trivia game is like appeals to the WWE community, going back to, what you were mentioning with like Monopoly or even Kim Kardashian applying that to Stardom, right? It's the right combination of IP plus sort of genre might be pretty effective. So I was like, hey, the LTV is probably going to be really low on a WWE trivia game, but the marketability of it might be through the roof compared to like a match 3 game. So what if I build on web or in this portal a trivia game, and what if we can use that as a marketing vehicle to reach a broader WWE community that's not currently playing a match 3 RPG game? So if we bring them in and get them engaged in that, again, in the portal, so it's a social ecosystem, right? So now they're meeting people who are part of guilds, they're talking to people who are just fans of WWE, et cetera, but you might be able to convert some percentage of that traffic to play the RPG game that has the higher LTV, and now you've collateralized your LTV against like, not just the product that monetizes well, but also this really easy to acquire on kind of more casual product. Now, I don't know if it ever, where that ended up landing, because as you can imagine, it's IP and there's like deal terms and whatever. So, but I think the thesis is still pretty.
No, totally.
Pretty
Yeah, it speaks to again, stuff that defines what we try and do with our developers, right? Is like, look at the ways you can broaden and deepen a player's engagement with your game as an IP. As well as another thing that really stood out from what you were describing is how thoughtful and kind of game specific you need to be in your approach, and that what works for one game's really unique combination of mechanics might not work for another. So to what you were saying, a trivia game does seem like a really good idea for an IP-based game with a lot of lore, right? And Stash's approach for that reason is extremely custom, right? It's extremely white glove, because we want to build the level of experience you guys have been building and potentially even further. And I think in order to do that, you actually do need to customize very extensively.
Yeah, and I think, how you operate it matters a lot too, right? Like what you invest in based on the game and the community and how you operate it. Because I've seen products just launch a D2C option as just a payment solution, check the box, and then, barely does anything. And then I've seen teams go really deep, and it's the majority of the revenue and kind of engagement from that particular game.
Could you talk about how like D2C evolved at Scopely? How was it received? How did it grow?
Yeah. So I'd say, so like I said, I was off on my own little island initially. Even the game team was like not fully bought in, like the WWE team. I think they understood the principle, but there was like skepticism around whether or not it would work. So in my case, I spun out, like I basically took a small amount off the P&L, very small amount off the P&L, spun up a team, hired two guys that I'd worked with before at Glue. And then we spun up a team in like Eastern Europe, and basically built it from scratch. So like we built the offering as a standalone thing with a separate team, created a WebGL port for the product. So we had that stood up, and we spun it all up without impacting the dev team at all, like zero impact to their initially zero impact to the resources. Once it was live, it definitely ate up all their time. But yeah, like kind of like, just had this like little skunkworks team going after this thing. Got it stood up. I think everyone was surprised. I wasn't. I was actually kind of disappointed, to be honest. I thought it would have done like more as a percentage of revenue out of the gate, but like it was still pretty good. I mean, so I focused on like, what are the touch points in the existing product? How do we get the word out if we can't reach out in the product, et cetera, et cetera. But once it took off, it became very obvious to everyone that like the opportunity there was big, right? And I think at that point, not only is it easier to argue for pushing for direct to consumer and other products, I think other P&L owners look at that and say, we want that, right? Because it's like it's such an obvious win. And to my earlier point, I launched a guild feature, and that's my top priority. And you've got a forecast against it, but show me one forecast that's ever accurate.
Yeah,
I've never seen one ever in my entire career. And so it's like, are you going to take half a year to build a product and maybe there's upside on it, or maybe it delivers what you forecasted? Or would you rather know that you make this much money, and if you convert this much, and if you can increase engagement, this is the quantifiable, predictable impact?
Yeah,
right.
I always ask developers, like, show me one other initiative you can name that would like just flat margin expansion of 30%.
Exactly. I mean, and it's got so many implications too to growth, right? Because like, what do you do with the extra margin?
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's when, and I think this is what's happening in the industry, is that like, because as you were saying, it's such a competitive industry that any edge is a competitive necessity if it gets broad enough. And I think now we're seeing that certainly in our conversations with customers, especially with some of the new options that are available to D2C, whereby if you're not doing this, you can't win on CPIs, right? So either you have to have a game that's 30% better than your competitors, which very, very, very few games are, or you need to adopt this. And so I think D2C is transitioning from being something that was a nice advantage to a competitive necessity.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think it's just a matter of time. How early are you is going to dictate, again, your position in that power law.
Well, I would say if you're adopting now, you're already pretty late. Like if you look at 80% of the top 50 games or D2C, and if you remove match, it's basically all of them.
Yeah, and then now we're in the how good are you at it
completely
kind of phase,
completely
right?
Especially with link out based functionality, which I think has opened up new categories of studios to D2C. I think there were two predominantly that it opened up.
Yeah.
One being casual, more hybrid casual, and then the second being startup devs, just because D2C was not something you would invest in if you're scaling a game.
Yep.
However, with link out, I think that changes. And so
link out does. I agree with that. And I think, our stash pay solution is going to be to me that to be honest, that was a huge factor in me deciding to join was stash pay, because I think that that's going to be revolutionary for not just mid-core games, because mid-core games are the biggest sort of lowest hanging fruit for D2C, obviously, because a very small percentage of your total spend population contributes the majority of the revenue. So if you reach those individuals and figure this out in a way to engage them, you've already captured 80% of the value. And then, the extra 20% is diminishing returns on effort. However, if you've got a casual game, relatively more evenly distributed spends, friction's a big problem. Pushing somebody to a website is more difficult. Tolerance to kind of crazy features and stuff is less. So I think something like link outs, something like stash pay, I think stash pay specifically, because it's functioning differently than link outs, is in my opinion, that's definitely going to be.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that, because when we engineered stash pay, one of the things that was really important to me is because I knew that, okay, the key difference with this is it's going to unlock new genres, right? As well as new types of studios. That's why we built it, so that when you complete the payment, you don't have to end the session, because specifically to serve games like match games and other hybrid casual games, which typically don't have as much of a kind of planned economy from a player's perspective, monetization is much more like gameplay mechanic, prompted, urgent, and at the moment, if you think about continuing a level or continuing more lives,
very contextual, right?
Yeah, you need to complete that purchase without ending the session.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why stash pay is the only product outlet that does that.
It's that, and I mean, here's the other crazy thing, to replicate what you've got inside of a mobile game in terms of, let's call it, your suite of tools from a live service management standpoint, is a lot of effort, right? To replicate all those kind of step up offer, segmentation, everything you've already got built, especially if you're going to do multivariate tests and any of that kind of stuff, is very expensive and takes a long time. However, with stash pay, you don't really have to do that replication work, because what you have is basically an immediate, payment option that's direct to consumer at the point of sale contextually, leveraging all the tools you've already built.
Yeah.
Right? And so then the D2C experience on the kind of desktop or web or whatever becomes more about, again, how do you retain your audience? How do you leverage new growth vectors? How do you improve the relationship with the player and do things you wouldn't otherwise be able to do? So it's a suite of tools, but I think again, stash pay is, for me, the most exciting thing that I've.
But this is actually where I want to switch over to Henry, because Henry, you were most recently at Homa, which obviously is a hyper-casual developer. A year ago would not have been anywhere near addressable for D2C, both because of the nature of the developer and because of the nature of the category. But I'm very curious what your experience at Homa was when it came to D2C as opposed to scope.
Yeah, so we were thinking about D2C a year ago, but not for any product that's currently launched. We actually have a game in development. Homa has a game in development that is it's got a mass marketability element to it, but at the end of the day, it is a mid-core experience. So to get ahead of that, and also having someone running that game who was actually part of Spencer's team on WWE, who had a lot of experience with web shop integration, we started looking at the space, and we knew that this was something that would be on our long-term roadmap. For us, though, everything really changed earlier this year with some of the Apple Epic legislation that came about that really led us to see that we could have a much easier, cleaner user experience and implementation of D2C. So for a game like All In Whole, a lot of the purchases are not thought out far in advance. For a game like Marvel Strike Force, you might have players that know that every single month or every single week they're going to be spending $50, $100 and planning for that, deciding they're going to spend it around a weekend event, knowing that they're allocating for that in their monthly budget. For All In Whole, you run out of time on a specific level and you just want that, it's just that one more turn feeling. It's that impulse buy. It's kind of that you're going out the checkout counter and you say, you know what, I really want that thing. So being able to serve people in app and keep them playing and keep that momentum was huge. So yeah, as we started to understand what that possibility was, we actually transitioned our thinking from, okay, we're going to do this eventually when we have a core of whale-like behavior in a game that's more of a mid-core game, to actually, we're probably just leaving money on the table by not implementing this in a game that's monetizing to the tune of, $6, $7, $8, $9 million a month in IAP revenue. A lot of that could be converted over to a much better margin profile if we just serve it in the right way. And so that's when we started to talk to some of the companies that are out there that are doing D2C. And actually, that's where I got to know Stash quite well and understand what the capabilities were, and was really impressed by the cleanliness of user experience and the white glove approach that Stash takes to making sure that the experience is custom catered to the actual game. It doesn't feel like you're being ripped out or being sold something that's sort of cheap or suspect. It actually feels really native to the experience, and that's something that I'm really excited about, that we can continue to push, continue to partner with developers in a very deep way and work with them to advise them on best practices in that space.
Yeah, and I would argue that, with us joining and in general, there aren't very many D2C sort of options with experience in actual game dev and publishing on the core team, right? So like having the ability to come in and provide that white glove approach and kind of understand what development looks like and what teams are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, I think is a point of leverage that, till now hasn't really been seen.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially with the pedigree of a top tier game developer, like where you can go in and, because a lot of what we do does have to be consultative and collaborative, because there's nothing standalone that you could stand up in D2C that would do everything for you, right? Like fundamentally, you have to bring players from the game to the shop. You have to, implement the incentives in the correct way. You have to, kind of communicate with what you already have and leverage all your existing assets to make D2C successful. So I think one of the things that's already become apparent since you joined is how we can help customers, situate D2C in the context of their broader game, and then both use it, as you say, as like a testing ground to experiment with new features, which is a super exciting aspect of web development. And is one of the reasons I think web stores have some staying power, as well as use it to, broadly bring a higher level of sophistication to stuff like segmentation and things like that. So you kind of answered the question of like why you joined Stash, but I'm curious to get just a quick read from each of you on, what you're excited about in terms of D2C, where you think it's going, what you think the future is.
Yeah, so very excited about D2C. To your point, I think it's going to be like a necessity. Like no one's going to be able to be competitive without it in the very near future. As far as where it's going, I think it's going to evolve. I think, again, back to kind of what I mentioned before, you want to meet the players sort of where they are on whatever form factor that they're currently occupying and at all times, potentially. And so I think what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot more cross-platform D2C sort of solutions taking off with a, focus on not just replicating the same product that they have on their mobile phone or whatever, but like, again, how is it accretive to the experience based on whatever that platform is? So if it's, web, what are you doing on web that you don't necessarily have the capability of doing easily or in a good UX way on mobile? Same thing with like, I think eventually console will adopt a similar kind of approach. I think that's going to be an opportunity as well.
And we've already had because we also supply the launcher product.
Yeah,
it's been really notable and interesting to see console developers both interested in direct distribution on desktop and interested in web shops. So I think you're right.
Yeah. And I think you're seeing some, so even now, console games, free to play is much bigger than it was even 3 years ago. So you've got, some really big products on like PS5 and Xbox that are free to play. I think you're going to see the same thing kind of happen with D2C. I think that, D2C is going to also become sort of an opportunity for, attribution, which you've mentioned before, when it comes to like new sources of traffic. I think there might be distribution advantages that are going to come out of D2C. Again, with like you've mentioned, APK side loading, if there are storefronts that pop up that are in effect, the Epic to Steam equivalent, you might see some like ad companies moving into that sort of space because it's an opportunity. I think that you're going to see a couple other things too. I mean, personally, I think that there's going to be this aggregation effect. So I think that there'll be like population aggregation and retention features that are a function of not shared economies, but shared access between players. So I think a good example of this is like auction houses and MMOs. I think what we're going to see is like trade sort of like between game content kind of take off, at least on the PC side. So the ability to, hey, I got this sword and let me reach out to this other random guy in this different game that I just started playing and see if he wants to swap me for this shield or this car or whatever. And I think like every single one of those things I just mentioned is going to have a direct to consumer sort of opportunity beyond just that social kind of or gameplay sort of enhancing component. I think it will be like a direct opportunity to monetize each of those actions in a particular way. And obviously, if you're, again, controlling more of the margin on those transactions, I think you're going to see drastic improvement to P&Ls that way and a stickier audience, which is at the end of the day is, I think, what everyone wants at this point, because, it's a very like red ocean when it comes to breaking in or a very difficult kind of place to defend an audience once a game gets old. So
yeah, I think it is notable. Like a lot of what we see when we work with devs is that a lot of things that are good ideas to do D2C are things that a community is already kind of doing themselves through, slap together solutions. So one of the things I always encourage devs to do who are thinking about D2C is like look at your existing players' behavior on Facebook or on forums or on Discord, and then see how you can enable that in Deep Direct.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think today a lot of people still think about D2C as web shops. And sure, web shops are part of it, but really where I think this goes is the end-to-end consumer-publisher relationship and personalizing that experience. I mean, we're living in the age of personalized content. We're living in the age of what I want, where I want, when I want, how I want, and D2C allows the publisher to really control and custom cater that experience from install with things like the APK install experience. So you have a native app that is custom catered to you with a direct relationship to the publisher, a game launcher, so you can launch maybe even a mobile game on your web browser in a very seamless way and play it everywhere, maybe a slightly different experience even. And of course, the margin that you can accrue from providing a better value and the value creation that both the consumer and the publisher get from having that direct relationship and cutting out a middleman. So I think it really is end to end, if I could sum it up. And it's not just, okay, we have a web shop and we don't have to pay Apple and Google anymore. It's we actually have a relationship from the moment of install that is directly with the consumer, that is not obfuscated by any third party, that we can control, that we can personalize, and that we can really optimize for their behavior and their preferences.
I completely agree. I think, like, as you say, like people think of D2C as a web shop feature type thing, whereas it's really a fundamental change in the relationship with you and your players. And I think, especially after ATT, developers are increasingly and more acutely aware of the value of that relationship and how dangerous it is to, not own it. But also, I think developers are still just discovering the opportunities that arise when you do own it.
Yeah. I mean, games are an incredibly personal experience when you think about it. You play them in your free time. You play them with some of your closest friends. You play them in a way that is very personal to you, And so to be able to have, publishers understand that and then craft experiences around that is really, really exciting. And I think there's a lot of opportunities that we're just scratching the surface of that they're going to come to market in the coming years. So, it's exciting to be on the forefront of that. It's exciting to have the relationship with developers and have that ability to talk to them and hear what they want. And some of our earliest customers right now are actually informing what we build and what we do. So our partners are helping us to form our roadmap. We're seeing what's happening in their games. It's not just the experience of people like Spencer who come in, who've been doing this for years, but it's also understanding what are consumers doing in the market, what are game publishers trying to achieve, how can we help them to do that more efficiently, and then work with them to really create more value for everyone.
Yeah. The one thing I would add is I think, one really cool thing about direct to consumer is it's so aligned. Like our success as a direct to consumer company is defined by the success of the partners that we're working with. So if the game publisher developer is succeeding, we're succeeding, right? And so like doing everything we can to make them more successful is like the top priority.
Yeah. As a business development person, sort of at my core, one of the things that I love about interesting partnerships and interesting business models is the alignment of interests. I would even say that free to play is actually a great definition of that. No one ever forces you to spend money in a free to play game. You're only successful if the game is enjoyable enough where someone actually opens up their wallet and wants to spend in that game. And, a lot of B2B SaaS businesses are pulling margin, or they're finding ways to, extract money from their partners or their customers or their clients, whatever they want to call it. The cool thing about our model is that we are literally tied to the success of our partners, right? So when they do well, we do well, and there's no other way to have it happen. We're not pulling a fee. We're not trying to take money out of their pocket. We're actually trying to find ways where we can all win together and grow the pie. And one of the questions we get sometimes is gross revenue going to be impacted by this? Are we going to see a hit? Sure, our margin might grow, but there's more friction. That's not something we're seeing. No. And that's something that we actually spend a lot of time thinking about, because that's not good for anybody. That's not good for us. That's not good for the publisher. And I think there are ways that we can mitigate that. So again, it's really about this cool alignment of incentives. There's very few business models. I do think free to play is the core of one of them, but there are very few business models where there is a true alignment of interests across the board. And the way that we're trying to partner with game publishers and game developers is actually one of these models.
Yeah, completely agree. It's like no risk up front, just if we succeed, you succeed.
Yep.
Cool. Is there anything else you guys want to touch on, or anything we should?
Not really on my end, aside from I think like if you're not thinking about D2C and not just thinking about D2C, but thinking about how to, again, grow the pie, improve engagement, deepen your relationship with a customer.
Do you mind actually maybe if I ask you one question?
Yeah.
When you started to build D2C from scratch at a game developer, what are the things you had to do? Like, what is the challenge? What does it involve?
Yeah, so I think when you're building D2C from scratch, the biggest challenge is deciding what to focus on, right? So it's like, what are you prioritizing? Because again, it's kind of like data, right? Like you can collect as much data as you want, and you can pipe it into a billion different dashboards. But unless you know the right questions to ask, that information is like highly useless. It's not going to provide you any insights. It's not actionable. So I think here it's like, what are you really looking to do? And what is your strategy? And then focusing on those things above everything else and having a clear intent and sort of understanding around the bets you're making. Otherwise, you're just going to bite off more than you can chew, or focus on the wrong things, or not, again, check the box instead of really go deep into something to drive as much value as you possibly can out of it. So I think like just starting out, it's like, where's your leverage? Like your strategic value. Again, I have this like 80-20 kind of saying. It's like, hey, where do you achieve? You should achieve 80% of the value of something out of the gate. And then, the other 20% you fight for over time and
but even before you get to like that level of discretion where you have some choice, there's a lot of like, basics, not basics, but like, infrastructure requirements.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, did you already have the Scopely ID system before you started rolling out D2C?
No.
Yeah, that's almost always one of the challenges developers need to address, is creating some kind of ID system that isn't, a device-based ID.
Yep. And we had to do that. Yeah. Actually, that was part of that process. Yeah.
So you had to solve that, and then there's
you got to solve payments. That. Yeah, payments, merchant of record. Oh, that is a nightmare.
Yeah. Now, being the merchant, it is a lot of work. And I think especially if you want a high quality payments product that, has high acceptance, low cost.
Yeah.
That takes some work.
It takes work. It takes there's so much logistics involved in kind of all that stuff, especially if you're wanting to provide that direct to consumer service like globally, not just one locale. So it's like, there's a lot of like, I guess, like very, very sort of like beginning phase considerations that you need to take into account before you even get to the point where you're prioritizing. Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, that's what makes working with a partner that's done it and can get you speed to that point as fast as possible, so you can start making more kind of strategic decisions around where you apply your energy. I think like that's one of the values that Stash brings. A key value that Stash brings.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Being able to spin up partners extremely quickly and having the infrastructure to put it in place. And as Spencer said, identify 80% of the value really, really fast and then grow that incrementally over time is one of the key benefits that we can offer. I mean, the way that we've spun up several of our partners on Stash Pay within days has been awesome to see. And you see results immediately. I mean, that's one of the cool things about free to play. The feedback loop is really fast. So if you can get the implementation to be really speedy, it's amazing. So when folks are ready to go, we're the kind of business that's going to be quick on our feet and really able to drive that and dive in deep, not just say, okay, here's a piece of technology, but actually be able to work with them and advise and guide and make sure it's working at the optimal level of user experience.
Yeah, and one of the things we're proud of is like that our product is self-optimizing, and kind of related to what Spencer was saying earlier. When you're not operating on like a version release cycle, like you can just, ideally with a Stash integration, you can do it, forget about it, and it will just continue to get better and better and better.
Yep.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add, just in closing remarks, is that the cool thing about Stash is not only that we're doing something exciting, something trailblazing in the industry, but it's actually the people that we're doing it with. And as a person who's been around companies that have grown and scaled and done some pretty incredible things, I find that, working with smart people is the best part of it. And, you two guys being incredible examples of that. The amount of intellectual horsepower that we have in the building already is pretty awesome. And so if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're wondering, how can I get involved? Is there an opportunity for me? Hit us up. I mean, there's tons of opportunities. We are growing like crazy. We are trying to bring on the best and the brightest, or even the people who just want to be here the most and want to learn, because that's really what we're trying to do, is to become a company that learns quickly, a company that grows, and a company that amasses a level of talent density that is unparalleled. So we're really excited to talk to you if you're interested, and please don't be shy.
I completely agree. Like, I think one of the cool things about being in like a new category is like, yeah, there's a handful of people that maybe with Spencer working on this, but like there isn't really a kind of like, great number of people that are experienced in what we're doing. We're all still kind of figuring it out. And that makes a broad variety of people. Like I think the Stash team is at its best when it brings like expertise from actually outside of games, from other aspects of engagement or e-commerce or web development, and marries them with very game-specific knowledge. And I think that's what you have to do to scale D2C.
Yeah, and I would argue like that is an attractive reason to join Stash for sure. But it's also an attractive reason to work with Stash. Like ultimately, do you want to work with smart people who are like innovating and driven to make your business better? Or do you want to like go with a, plug and play kind of like not super engaged partner who's
there's a level of passion here for this category, this industry really, that is awesome to see. I mean, I'm sitting next to two guys who are extremely hardcore gamers, to say the least. I didn't tell my personal story, but I got an NES for my 6th birthday and never looked back. And I think one of the things that made us great in the early Scopely days was that we really loved games, we really played games. I was a business development executive who wasn't just trying to figure out a way to be part of a growth industry, but I was playing all the new games and still am today. And that's what's really exciting. That was one of the really exciting things about going to Homa, to try all these new mechanics and hypercasual and hybrid and see it evolving. And so to really have a group of people together that loves what they do, that engages with the product, that thinks about it from the customer perspective is awesome. And it makes it a pleasure to come to work every day.
Yep.
All right. Well, there's nothing else. Thank you so much for, joining Stash. We can't be that bad if we got you guys to come and join. So, I speak on behalf of the whole team when I say like we could not be more excited to have both of you. I really mean that. I feel like we spent, a long time, past 2 years, like putting all the pieces in place, and you guys were really the final piece. So that's enormously exciting for like me and everyone else who's been working on this to say, because I think, just makes us very optimistic about the future.
Yeah, and we are thrilled to be here.
Yep.
Can't wait to, innovate and drive this D2C industry forward with you.
We're just getting started.
Yeah. All right, great. Thank you, guys.
Yep.
Thanks, Archie. Appreciate it.